Drawing a line of demarcation was relatively simple. Ukraine is fighting alone. European countries would be shocked by such an idea.
To divide Ukraine according to the Korean scenario. This idea is actively promoted by the Kremlin and certain Western politicians. We are promised peace in exchange for territory, but this is a deception. The success of South Korea was possible only thanks to the US Army and nuclear protection. No one is offering this to Ukraine. That is why the current compromise has nothing in common with the past.
There was absolutely nothing comparable to what Putin is currently demanding right now. For Ukraine to surrender and cede control of territories that Russia does not even physically occupy or control yet.
While some are trying to resolve the Ukrainian issue at our expense, other dictatorships around the world are already waiting for a precedent to start their own wars of aggression. In this episode, without spoilers, we will reveal the main behind-the-scenes secrets of the peace talks. You will find out who is really pushing for the division of Ukraine, what price a divided Korea is paying, and why our outcome will determine the fate of a global war in Asia. Watch until the end. To understand what exactly is being offered to Ukraine, we first need to figure out what actually happened with Korea and why this parallel still exists. Korea was under Japanese occupation for a long time. After World War II, in 1945, the country was liberated, but was immediately divided between the USSR and the United States along the 38th parallel, a purely arbitrary geographical line. It was supposed to be temporary, just for administrative convenience. But as often happens, the temporary arrangement became permanent. The North became communist under the leadership of Kim Il-sung, whom the USSR used as a puppet. The South came under American protection. Neither state recognized the other. Both considered the other to be an enemy-occupied part of a single country. And interestingly, both claimed Seoul as their capital. It's just that one was physically located there, while the other merely demanded it for itself. On June 25, 1950, the North Korean army crossed the border and attacked the South. The calculation was simple: a lightning-fast victory, unification under the red flag in just a few weeks. But things went completely differently. The UN Security Council, at that moment the USSR was boycotting its sessions and could not use its veto right, made the decision to send an international contingent from 16 countries to assist South Korea. In reality, these were mostly Americans under the command of General MacArthur. At first, the North Koreans pushed the South's forces all the way to the coast, occupying almost the entire peninsula. Then the Americans turned the tide and drove the North back to the border with China. And then China itself entered the scene, not wanting American troops directly on its border, and sent a 270,000-strong army to Korea. And everything turned upside down again. 3 years of fighting, hundreds of thousands dead, and no one emerged victorious. The front line stabilized roughly where it had started, along the 38th parallel. And in July 1953, an armistice was signed. Not a peace treaty, but specifically an armistice, an agreement to cease fire. Legally, both Koreas are still at war, they just aren't shooting. Notably, even then, South Korean President Syngman Rhee categorically refused to sign this agreement. He wanted to fight until a victorious end, but the agreement was signed on his behalf by UN forces. He simply had no choice.
When examining the specific historical case of the Korean Peninsula, drawing the demarcation line was a relatively straightforward process in geographical terms. Although it was accompanied by intense diplomatic and strong pressure from the United States, for the South Korean government to reluctantly accept and abide by these specific armistice conditions. South Korea was essentially left with no other choice, as the nation was deeply dependent on the presence of American military forces who were providing the critical security and protection necessary for its survival. There is a significant difference here. First of all, the United States' ability to exert pressure is much less, because this war is not being fought by the United States. Ukraine is fighting on its own.
And now they want to impose exactly this model on Ukraine. Talks about the Korean scenario have been going on for more than a year, but only now have they taken on concrete outlines. These are no longer just journalistic speculations, but real proposals with specific details and specific people behind them. Back in 2022, the Washington Post columnist David Ignatius wrote, "In Korea, there was no way to achieve a military victory at an acceptable cost," implying that Eisenhower at the time accepted what seemed at first glance to be an unfavorable deal. And in the end, it turned out to be a wise decision. At the time, this was perceived as the personal reflections of a single journalist. But already in January 2023, the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Oleksiy Danilov, stated directly, "Russia is trying to impose exactly this scenario on us, to fix the front line, to de facto divide the country into two parts, and to call this the end of the war. Here are the real Ukrainians, and over there are the not real Ukrainians. The Russians will make up anything they want." But this idea took on its most concrete form when the Trump administration got involved. The US President's special envoy, Kit Kellogg, revealed the details in an interview with Fox News, a 30-kilometer demilitarized zone along the front line. Ukrainian and Russian troops would each withdraw 15 kilometers from either side. The zone would be controlled by a coalition of willing countries, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. In other words, a 30-kilometer zone is being created, which will be strictly monitored. It will be possible to observe whether there are any violations, Kellogg said, adding that Ukraine is allegedly already prepared to take such a step. Later, he went even further and compared the future of Ukraine to the division of Berlin after World War II. A French and British contingent to the west of the Dnipro, Russians to the east, and a demilitarized zone in between. This sparked a wave of outrage. Berlin was divided after the complete capitulation of the Third Reich. Then Kellogg backtracked and wrote that he had been misunderstood. But the seed had already been planted. At the same time, The Economist reported that Ukraine and the US are already holding daily consultations about freezing the conflict along the front line. Now, the most important thing, what does this actually mean on the map? If the current front line is fixed, Russia will de facto keep parts of the Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions, as well as Crimea. That's more than 20% of Ukraine's official territory. Cities where people lived, industrial regions, and the seacoast. And if we retreat another 15 kilometers, Ukraine will have to withdraw its troops from Kupiansk, Vovchansk, Kostiantynivka, Yampol, Lyman, Siversk, Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, Orikhiv, Huliaipol, and a whole list of other cities. The head of the Council of Reservists of the Ukrainian Ground Forces, Ivan Timochko, directly called this proposal one that demonstrates a misunderstanding of real war. Will the Russians retreat the same distance? That's a rhetorical question. There's also another detail, Kherson. Even on Kellogg's own map, the city with the liberated bank of the Dnipro is for some reason marked in the red zone, that is, as Russian territory. This is either incompetence or a deliberate message. Neither inspires optimism. Those who promote this plan always have something to say in response. They say, look at South Korea today. It's a technological giant, a democracy, one of the leaders of the world economy. Samsung, Hyundai, Seoul skyscrapers. If Ukraine stops the active phase, it will have a chance at the same thing. But there's an important detail here that is usually forgotten. Immediately after the 1953 armistice, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. Its GDP per capita was lower than that of many African countries at the time. Until the late 1980s, it was actually an authoritarian state. There was no Korean miracle for several decades after the agreement was signed. What made this leap possible? The United States signed an alliance treaty with the Republic of Korea and stationed its military contingent there, 28,000 American soldiers who are still there today in 2026. This is a nuclear umbrella, a guarantee that cannot be ignored. Plus massive economic investments and access to American markets. None of these factors are present for Ukraine in the proposed scheme. NATO membership is blocked. As for American ground forces, Kellogg stated directly that the US will not provide them. Security guarantees are in question.
Ukraine is much better prepared to continue fighting on its own. Therefore, the fundamental notion that major global powers can unilaterally dictate and enforce a peace settlement seems to me to be somewhat detached from the actual reality of the situation.
In North Korea is the part that people prefer not to mention in their polished presentations. After 1953, the North chose the Juche ideology, relying on its own strength. An economic catastrophe occurred in the 1990s, a famine that, according to various estimates, claimed the lives of between 600,000 and several million people. The difference between the two Koreas became literally visible from space in nighttime satellite images, where the South shines with lights while the North is in complete darkness. Kim Il-sung turned into a living god, the founder of a dictatorial dynasty. Now the country is already ruled by his grandson. 70 plus years, 3 generations, and a peace treaty still hasn't been signed. For some reason, this side of the Korean scenario is never mentioned in proposals for Ukraine. And here it's worth saying who actually benefits from this plan. Russia wants to buy time, regroup, restore its military-industrial complex, accumulate resources, and carry out mobilization in such a way that it doesn't trigger internal upheaval. A freeze is not peace, it's just a pause before the next strike. We've already been through something similar. The Minsk agreements of 2014 to 2015, that was an attempt at such a freeze. They fixed the line, agreed to withdraw equipment, and discussed special status for certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Everyone remembers what happened next. Russia used those years to prepare for a full-scale invasion. It armed itself, trained its army, and practiced tactics. The result was February 24th. Agreeing to the Korean scenario does not end the war. It just starts the countdown to the next one. It is important that even serious analytical publications are not keeping silent about this topic. In June 2026, The Economist reported that Kiev and Washington were holding daily consultations specifically about this scenario. The president's office called the article inaccurate, but the fact that this topic is being discussed at the highest level is something you can't hide from. So what fundamentally distinguishes Ukraine from Korea? First, Korea was divided along an arbitrary line that did not coincide with any real cultural or linguistic boundaries. Both Koreans are one people. In Ukraine, the situation is different. This is external aggression, not a civil conflict. Second, after 1953, Korea received American nuclear protection and massive support. Nothing of the sort is being offered to Ukraine.
European countries would be shocked by such an idea and would definitely not support Putin's demands for Ukraine to give up even more territory and limit its relations with the West. In the specific case of South Korea, it was precisely the continuous Western, and primarily American, military presence that effectively ensured a stable and lasting peace for many decades. But for Ukraine, this kind of specific peace formula is simply not going to be effective.
Third, Russia is not North Korea. 140 million versus 20. A nuclear arsenal, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. And no UN mechanism can force it to honor agreements if it decides to break them. Fourth, 70 years. That is exactly how long the temporary parallel has existed and still does. As for Zelensky's position, he is not closing the topic completely. In an interview with Le Point in September 2025, he said, "The example of South Korea shows that values and development can prevail." But he immediately made a caveat about the scale of the threat and a direct analogy. Most importantly, he emphasized, the issue of possible compromises regarding territories must be decided by the people, either through elections or a referendum. But it must be the position of the Ukrainian people specifically. And this is a fundamental condition without which any freezing of the conflict turns into a trap. Is there a way out, or is the Korean scenario truly inevitable? Leave your opinion in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe. Here we explain complex things in simple language. There will be more episodes like this, so don't miss out. See you next time.